Hi, I'm Katie. I'm going to show you guys a quick lesson plan in case you've procrastinated, you've put off trying to put something together, or you just want something quick that you can teach your students. We're going to do a watercolor lesson involving negative space. So this is a completed first layer of what you're going to be working with. So here are some of the materials I'll be using. I'm using the tubed watercolors. So you may or may not have access to these in a normal classroom. Usually you'd probably be using the ones in the small container like the Crayola type. But if you do have the resources for these are perfect for this lesson. You just want to make sure that you remind your students to only pour so much, else you're going to have a lot of watercolor used at one time and then you're going to have your money wasted. You want to have palettes ready for this, obviously water for watercolor, plenty of paper towels, and watercolor paper, preferably the kind that's thick enough so you won't have to worry about putting anything underneath. If you have tables that are okay to be ruined, you can use tape to create a border around your paper. If not, draw bleeding lines, which is what I have done here. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have your students pick the objects that they will be painting. So if they are skilled in drawing, you can have them choose which object they'd like to paint. If they are not, you can have them use tracers. For this project, I'm using leaves, which are very simple objects. You just want to remind your students that it is a negative space project, so anything inside the object will not be drawn, only the outlines. So I already have my leaves sketched out, so I'm going to just go right into the painting section. And a good prelude to this project would be to have your students practice shading with watercolor, or you can use this as the project that teaches them how to shade. So when you paint with this project, you want to tell them to stick with one color per object. So the first one I'll do with blue. So I'm going to do blue only to one leaf. So you want to load your brush with the paint, and you only want to dip it in a little bit of water, just enough to have the paint get on the brush. And you're going to follow the outline of your object. And then once you have enough loaded on one side of the outline, you're going to dip your brush in water and you are going to start to spread your paint away from that object. And one thing you really want to encourage your students to do is to have the paint spread enough so that it covers as much of the canvas area as possible without going into the white spaces of the insides of any of the objects. So when you go on to the colors of the next objects, tell them that it is okay to have the colors intermingle. You actually want that to happen. So you're almost creating a multi-colored wash, but with objects in the center. Okay. Now, another thing you also want to tell your students to do is when they're choosing the composition, tell them to have the objects spread far enough apart that you have enough room to let the watercolor spread, but at the same time you don't want them too far apart, so when you're doing your second layer you have enough areas for things to overlap. So I'm going to do a little bit more with this leaf, and then I'll show you adding color to the second leaf. So again, I want the color to be strong, closest to the outline, and then start to pull it away with water. And I'm going to let the colors mingle. So you can see obviously yellow and blue are starting to blend, which is fine. The only thing you want to avoid is any muddy or brown colors, because this will distract from your next layers. So you want your colors to be somewhat light, but blending them together is perfectly acceptable. Okay, so you basically want your entire canvas colored with the first layer, and then you can move on to your second layer. So I have this layer, it's already dried. You see I've let my colors intermingle. The pigment is darkest closest to the outline. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to draw my second layer. So when you draw the second layer, the one thing you want to be mindful of is you want the objects that you place to overlap in some form the first layer objects. So I'm probably going to draw 4 more leaves and have each of them touching one of these leaves in some form. Doesn't have to be a lot, just enough so that the pigment will cover the new object. And if you don't want your students spending too much time thinking about how their objects should be drawn, you can always get cutouts or tracers or have those made beforehand to save for time, depending on how long you want your lesson to go. If you want this to be for like a higher level class, I would suggest that you let them draw it themselves. Okay, so I have each of my new layer objects overlapping one of the first layer objects. So same rule as before, you want to pick one color to each object. So obviously you want to have it vary enough so that it doesn't wash into the first layer object. So obviously I'm not going to choose pink over pink or yellow over yellow. So I will do blue over pink. And it's the same rule, you want to let these go as far as possible across the canvas, and you want to let them intermingle with the new colors. And another thing I'd advise to save on time is either bringing hair dryers or drying racks or even fans to speed up the drying process in between layers, because that will be a bit of a time slip if you don't give your students some form of allowing these to dry faster than just waiting for them to dry naturally. So as before, when we were trying to not cover the inside of the first layer, now you're going to let the insides of the leaves from the first layer get covered by the second layer. So now the only thing you're avoiding is the inside of the leaves from the second layer. And then basically, you can continue with as many layers as you'd like. Normally, I'd suggest maybe 2 more layers after this, so 3 to 4 layers total. Elsewhere it's going to get too busy and crowded. You can do more if you'd like. And this lesson, from my own experience, has taken up about probably standard 45 minutes, depending on how well the class is able to grasp the project and how capable they are of drawing. I've yet to experience any real problems with it. Okay. So then you would just continue dragging this up, and then I'll show you another color, just for the sake of example. So once again, I'm letting my color pull into the first layer leaf, but not into the leaves of the second layer. Okay. And so that's eventually what it'll look like as you go. So all of these will be painted in, and then eventually you'll have layers upon layers of leaves, and it's just going to look like piles of leaves on top of each other, but all in gorgeous colors. And you'll have your students with an understanding of how to shade with watercolor, and yeah, pretty awesome stuff. So I will post a picture of the finished product so you guys can see, and as well as the steps of what I would do in a regular classroom.